Hello, my name is Matt Bumgardner. My wife and I own Blue Mountain View Farms. We are a third-generation dairy farm. We have 150 acres tillable with 100 in pasture and 50 in cropland. We milk 90 to 100 crossbred dairy cows, and currently we are transitioning to organic. We've been hybrid grazing for 18 years. Hybrid grazing combines confinement dairies with pasture. We find that we can maintain production. We get around 21,000 pound herd average with a 4.0 fat and a 3.2 protein, but we also add reduced costs through the grazing. We find that when we get 18 pounds of grass from pasture, we can reduce costs by $2 a day per cow. Those costs come from less mechanical harvesting. The cows are out getting their own feed, and we're also able to reduce protein that we feed in the barn and reduce the amount of grain that we feed. We can drop from 16 pound of grain over winter to about 13 pound of grain during summer. We find the cows have better health. They're out in the fresh air and sunshine. There's dry footing, so the foot health is much better. And we find the cows do much better on pasture rather than confined in the barn. Summer heat stress is not as bad because the cows seem to cool off better at night when they're outside. We can lower other expenses. There's not as much manure to haul because the cows are outside. We don't have electric costs because we don't have fans running at night during the summer. And many dairies have lights on overnight where obviously we don't have the lights on. Labor costs can be reduced, although management is maybe a little more because you're managing pasture, but there's not as much mechanically harvested feed. Pastures must be rested and rotated. When a cow takes a bite of grass, the grass must regrow and put reserves in the roots. If the cow takes a bite too soon, it depletes the root reserves, and then you don't get good yield, and the life of the stand could be at jeopardy. My paddocks range from 2 to 17 acres, and we move them throughout the paddocks using temporary wires and step-in posts. My preferred turn-in for grass height is 10 to 12 inches. I don't want the grass in head that is lower quality and the cows refuse it a little more. For dry cows and heifers, it can be better. They actually learn to eat that poor quality grass, and it's not so hard on a paddock when the grass is taller. We pull cows off around 4 inches. We find that we get a better canopy, so the grass will cool the ground. It'll also suppress some weeds, and the grass regrows much better when you're not getting into that crown of the plant. We want to make sure not to use our pastures as an exercise lot. Intake will be lower, grass growth will not be as well, and the cows will do better on a rotated pasture with fresh grass each day. I prefer a mix of orchard grass, meadow fescue, and red clover. We also have ryegrass, festoleum, and white clover. I find that the orchard grass yields better and seems to start to dominate the pasture. We've just started adding meadow fescue, which is supposed to have a high quality and last a good bit. And the red clover, while it's a biennial and lasts only 2 years, does really well for yield and provides nitrogen for the grasses. I prefer a 50-50 blend of grasses and legumes. Studies show that pastures with legumes in can get 5 more pounds of milk per cow per day. We found better results when we went from pastures without legumes to pastures that had a lot of legumes in. For forbs, we plant forage chicory, which is a chicory designed for forage. It's not quite like the wild chicory that you might find. We also have other wild forbs making their way in the pasture as the pasture ages, something like plantain and especially dandelion. We've actually had pastures become too much dandelion. With weeds, I want to be careful with perennial weeds. Do the cows eat that weed? Is it going to produce seeds? With this curly dock, it's a perennial, so it's always going to be there. The cows will eat the leaves and sometimes will eat the seed heads, but this plant is going to be here till we take care of it and get it out of here. And then it's going to leave this bare spot because of the canopy and the grass that wasn't able to grow in that spot. The way I control perennial weeds, being that I have organic regulations, is either learn to live with it, clip it to keep it from seed head, or dig it out with a shovel. You can always spray your pastures for weeds, but keep in mind that you will reduce the clover amount in that pasture, and as you become an advanced grazer, you shouldn't have to be spraying for weeds. Your pasture management should be taking care of the weeds. But certainly as a beginner, or if you get an invasive species, spray if you're allowed to. Mixing TMR with pasture can be challenging, but it can be made simple. I think the biggest key is keeping the cows full. You don't want cows in the barn waiting to go out in pasture, and you don't want cows standing in the pasture waiting for more pasture or waiting to come into the barn to eat. If you can keep those cows full, they'll produce better, they won't lose body condition, and just overall health should be better. We found that bringing the cows in to eat TMR before milking allows them to fill up their stomachs, so when they're waiting to milk, they're not standing there with empty stomachs. Then they get milked and they go out on the pasture ready to eat pasture again. Before we bring them in off the pasture and they'd wait to eat, then they'd eat and go out with a full stomach, and they didn't eat as well in the pasture. Starting out, for me, it's every spring. It's not just for a beginner grazer. You want to start with maybe 5 pounds of dry matter from pasture, and you just cut back your TMR and turn the cows out during the day for a few hours. As you want to increase the pasture intake, you just cut back on the TMR, and it's really a matter of time. How much time do they have out in pasture versus how much time in the barn? When we get up to 18 to 20 pounds of pasture, or even a little higher, it usually is about an hour in the barn to eat that TMR, and aside from milking, the rest of the time is spent out in pasture to get that intake. You want to reduce the amount of protein in your TMR. Obviously the grass is going to be high protein, anywhere from 16 to over 20%, depending on how young it is and what stage of growth it is in. The TMR, you want to be looking for energy and fiber to offset that high digestible, high protein grass. We found that 15 to 20 pounds of grass is a sweet spot for production. Going higher can reduce production, but that's not necessarily a problem if you're reducing costs more than the loss of production. It seems that as the cows learn about grass, as the heifers have been on grass and come up into the milking herd, you can go higher and not lose production. We've actually almost hit 22 pounds of dry matter before production started to drop. For fencing, I prefer a 4-strand high tensile fence for my perimeter. I find I can sleep better at night because even if the electric goes off, the cows aren't going to get out. For interior, I prefer 2-strand. That kind of keeps the heifers and unexperienced animals from jumping paddocks or getting where they shouldn't be. Our paddocks range from 2 to 17 acres and are subdivided with poly wire and step-in posts. We use reels that are geared to make reeling up the wire much quicker. Our water lines are set to NRCS standards. We have 1.25 to 1.5 inch main lines, depending on how far we have to push it and how far uphill we need to go. We use quick disconnect couplers for each water trough, and we can move a water trough throughout our pasture system where the cows are no more than 300 feet away from water. Our lanes are improved according to NRCS standards. We did that because we had some washing. We would have mud when it was rainy, and we found the improved lanes work much better. Contact your local conservation district and NRCS offices for more help. They can provide technical assistance and also might have funding available.